Did you know that a question can change minds? I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked. On today's show, we'll be talking with Mary Alice Arthur, a unique and remarkable person who builds thriving people and groups that can work together at their highest levels. She'll be talking about the final 2 powers of the 5 powers. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Madelyn Blair, and this is Unlocked, a show all about unlocking and activating the resilient leader in you. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. This helps me, and it helps others who are looking for similar information. Questions and hosting. These are the remaining powers that Mary Alice will cover today. As I thought about them as I prepared my role for today, I was reminded of a project for a large international organization where I had been asked to examine the particular challenges presented by women who worked in the organization, or maybe I should say challenges to women who worked in the organization. We conducted interviews and focus groups and discussions and analysis sessions of the data we had collected. The one point that comes to mind in this case is when we were looking at the participation of women in meetings. We had observed that it seemed harder for a woman to get her point presented and picked up on and discussed unless the point was finally picked up by a man who would then present it and ask it or whatever, and then it would be talked about seriously. I remember saying that being in the same kind of meetings, I often would take the idea that I wanted to convey and turn it into a question and ask it. It was, of course, a question where I knew the answer, but as a question, it provided others in the meeting the excuse to explore the question, and therefore the topic hidden in the question got discussed. My women colleagues were aghast. They would say, "But that doesn't show what you know. It doesn't reflect your real contribution." Some even said, "That's such a female way to talk about something." Their comments disturbed me somewhat, but not enough that I changed my strategy. I continued to turn my ideas into questions when it was the only way to assure it would be considered. Several years later, I was at a conference where the power of asking a question was presented. The speaker said, "Just asking a question is an intervention because minds love to grapple with questions. Once asked, the subject is treated seriously." Yeah, I thought. I felt remarkably justified. Questions are powerful. It's no wonder that Mary Alice put questions among the powers of the 5 powers. And today we'll also talk about that last power, hosting. I have some thoughts about that one too, but I'll let Mary Alice have the first words on that one. Let's bring Mary Alice on. Hello again. I'm so glad you were able to come back, Mary Alice, to finish this.
Thank you. And I love that story. What a perfect lead-in.
Good. I thought you'd enjoy it. It's true, too. Mary Alice Arthur calls herself a story activist. She uses story and hosting to create brave and transformational spaces where people can find, craft, and live the stories that take them into flourishing future. She has worked with thousands and thousands of people. She is the author of the amazing book, I got to get it on screen, 365 Alive. She's the steward of the flow game, a unique way to take a playful approach to serious questions. But today, we'll continue our conversation on the 5 powers. to cover the last two, questions and hosting. Mary Alice is an old friend, and I'm just always happy to have her here to talk with her. All right, Mary Alice, I suggest we begin with maybe just a quick summary of what you went over the last time, because some people may not have seen it, although they always can go back and see it. Everything, all my shows are available on YouTube. So please.
Well, so we were talking about the five powers, which are appreciation, story, invitation, questions, and hosting, and then kind of supported by whatever your personal practice is. So just quickly on those three, the fact that when you have appreciation in the field, there is a more generous field. So appreciating people's strengths, working to help people see how they're valued and how they fit into something. This actually drives people wanting to be part of something, wanting to give more to it. So it's interesting to me, having lived in New Zealand, which is the earthquake zone. And, I had somebody say to me once, you have to be aware what you've chosen when you decide to live on the zipper. And I was part of civil defense there. Woo. So I learned something besides the fact that you should have dry socks and, keep your eyes clear. And that was the fact that when a major disaster happens, your fridge, which is a source of potential nourishment, will be good for 2 to 3 days as long as you leave the door closed. So here's the question. Given that most people couldn't eat everything that's in their fridge within that period of time, have you made friends with the neighbor? Because, it's a weird thing to go knock on the neighbor's door. Hi, I'd like to eat out of your fridge. Would you like to eat out of mine? But this relationship, the mutual appreciation built over time, is something that actually helps a field to be more generous and more generative. Second, the power of story, which is the fact that story is always operational in the background, not only my own story, so how I story leadership, or how I story project work, or how I story this kind of person or that kind of person is going to be active, but also I'm stepping into a story when I become part of a group, and an organization has a story and a place has a story. All of those are operating. The more I know about story, the more clear I can be, and the more I can make a choice about the story I want to be in. And then the third power of invitation, how you invite somebody is how they show up. There's a real art form to invitation. And the more we can invite people personally in a way they can understand what we're about to do and what their contribution is, the more successful we can be. It's a very simple way to make sure people show up in the way we need them to show up and ready to go. So these are the first three powers. So if we move on to the fourth power, this is the power of questions. And I loved Madelyn's story because I also agree with whoever the speaker was. A question is already an intervention into a system. It starts to work. And if you find a compelling question, it will not let your brain alone until it's been answered. It just, starts working away in there. It's very fascinating. The other thing I've learned personally is that if I've ever gotten myself into trouble with other people, it's usually because I operated off an assumption. I didn't ask a question. Hard lessons learned. Every time when I hit that point, I go, I should have asked a question first. Because, the other thing isn't so helpful. An assumption that hurts somebody else, or that puts their back up, or that squashes someone's innovative idea just because I don't understand it, is not a good way to go. It's not really a practice that helps somebody step into wanting to teamwork and wanting to do well together. So a question is a powerful intervention, and there's some things to know about creating them and how to work with them. The first one is, most of us are very aware of transactional questions. They are what I call the what's for dinner question. What's for dinner? That's actually a question that you want an answer to. So most of us use questions because we want an answer to them. How far away am I from the nearest supermarket? Who's done this before? How much did it cost? Where's the proof that this is going to work? Who else are you going to be working with? These are all transactional questions. They aren't actually aligned in the way to help us get somewhere different. They're not transformational questions. So first of all, is the focus on what kind of question am I actually asking? What's my intention in asking this question? And a lot of people ask rhetorical questions because they want you to know that they have the answer. They want you to say the answer they have in mind. I've done a lot of conference work, and I remember one time Somebody stood up. I said, so anybody here, we've heard from our speaker, anybody have a question? Guy stands up in the audience, begins pontificating. And I heard it come out of my mouth, excuse me, do you want fries with that? It just was, like, so what I value most is when I ask a question where somebody says, I've never been asked that before, or I never thought about it that way before.
Yeah.
And I have to say my favorite interviewer of all time at this moment is Tammy Simon, who is the owner of Sounds True, because often when she's in an interview, she says, I'm curious about this. And then she asks a question. And usually the speaker goes, wow, I've never thought about it like that. So she has the ability to ask questions that widen the field of conversation, widen the edges of something. And I think that's an incredibly powerful attribute. And it makes the other person thoughtful and engage on a different level too. Mm-hmm. So questions are a really, really powerful tool, and they're also an art form.
Well, speaking of it being an art form, I really want us to do some demonstrations.
Sure.
Because we both have learned that questions are so important. And of course, I have to struggle getting up, finding 10 questions every week for my guests.
Okay, but let me ask you, is there some concern or something that matters to you right now that's kind of on your mind that you have a question about? Let's see if we can do some sharpening.
Oh, gosh, that's a great question. You're making me think. As a matter of fact, the answer is yes.
Oh, okay.
I had a conversation with a coach the other day. She was not coaching me because actually I'm hoping to bring her on the show because she just was so clear about things. And she asked me, of course, what I do as a background. She wanted to make sure that she wanted to be on my show. And she stopped me at one point and she said, that's what you ought to be doing, Madelyn. And so I'm sitting here going, is that really, was she right? And I'm concluding that she is right, but I'm still thinking about, first of all, I know that I'm a transition coach. I love helping people move from one part of their life, one career to another career, one aspect to another aspect. They're getting married, they're going to college, they're deciding on retirement, they're trying to do a change. I mean, all kinds of things where we have to go through a transition. That's where I really love to help people. But what I was describing was when I help teenagers. And she said, you should be helping young people. And so I'm really questioning in my own mind, can I make a business of helping just young people in their transition? I mean, they're making major decisions in their teen years before their brains have even finished formulating. And yet they've got to make a choice as to what they're going to do after high school. Are they going to go to college or not? Are they going to go to trade school? They're going to go to college. Are they going to do nothing? These are big decisions. So that's what I'm exploring.
So a few things are arising in my mind. So, like any question is like a diamond. It has facets. Oh. There are many ways you can, and to actually think about it metaphorically like that, like I'm turning this slightly and I'm seeing how the light angles through it now. So if I've got somebody in a flow game and again, the flow game is a game that questions your question, which is kind of cool. So we do sharpening of the questions first, and our job is to try to brainstorm as many alternatives as possible to give somebody a database of potential questions that they could dance with for, not just for this moment, but longer. Like you might say, oh, I like this for right now this week, and then suddenly the question shifts to this, it morphs to on and on and on as I'm exploring this territory. And for me, it's sounding like the underlying territory is one of a couple of things. One is, what do I know about the power of the in-between, which is what I'm naming transition? What do I know about the power of the in-between that is a unique gift to the world right at this moment? So there's something about that facet of this unique ability you have to focus on the transition moment. And then there's another aspect or facet of this of in what way could I serve young people with the unique talents and skills that I have in a way that would be generous and abundant for them and for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that word, generous and abundant, for both them and me.
Yes. So both of you. I mean, because you use the word business, but there's also something for me in because I know your age and stage, and I might name it like this kind of what is the most brilliant offering I can bring in this winter time of my life?
What is the most brilliant, did you say?
Yeah, brilliant offering I could bring in this winter time of my life, or in this third chapter, or however you want to name that.
Mm-hmm.
Seasonal metaphor, but because each person's life has ages and stages.
That's right. I am definitely in winter, no question. I'm
You know,
not worried about it. There's
No.
snow up there.
Yes, and that could indicate something. I have some wisdom. I have some life experience.
I sure do.
So how is if as you reflect on those questions I've just posed right now, what's standing out for you?
Actually, it's the last one.
Hmm.
Because what I have discovered is, because I don't want to take the time on me in this session, I just wanted to demonstrate this aspect of questioning. But the one thing that really pops out at me is what I bring to young people. In fact, I bring it to all my coach, the people that I coach. But in particular with young people, I do not judge what they are thinking. I just don't judge it. Because I haven't invested in them as that child, and I can't follow them through the rest of their life. So I back away because they have to also develop their own agency and capacity to understand they know themselves as well as they can. I'll just say it that way, because they're always going to keep knowing themselves more and more and more and more and more as you get older. But they have to depend on that ability to call upon themselves. So I think the real gift is non-judgment.
Jean Houston, who's really been a leader in the whole personal development field, would call that being a friend at court.
Yeah.
Somebody who can speak on your behalf.
Yep.
Who's not a parent, who's not entangled with you in any way, but somebody who can speak on your behalf, and we all need that. Mm-hmm. We all need a friend at court. Would we like to roll the dice and get a card out of the flow game on this question?
Yeah, I think we have time for that.
Okay, so I actually have the game set up next to me, and I don't know if I can show it to you without doing weird stuff with the camera. Should I try?
Let's try. The worst thing that could happen is I have to edit it out.
Okay.
There it is. I can see it.
Yes, so that's the flow game. It has north, south, east, and west, heaven and earth. And this is a little die, so it has the colors on it. So I want to invite you. I'm going to shake my hand. I'm just going to invite you to say now, and I'm going to drop the dice.
Okay, now.
It's given us a green card. The green with the bear on it stands for action. Mm-hmm. So this is obviously, again, so we're going with the final question, the winter of my life. So how would you like me to pick the card? You could say anything from the top, cut it in half, the third one down, the shuffle, and I'll tell you when to stop.
I want the second one from the bottom.
The second one from the bottom. So what's on the other side of this card is either a question or a picture. What will it take for you to get your first/next customer, is what it says.
Oh my goodness. How is that appropriate or not?
So when you think about, read the question out, the one that I asked you that you said, I like that one, the final one.
What is the most brilliant offering that I could bring to the world at this time of my life?
Mm-hmm. I think I said in this winter time of my life, right?
Yes.
Something like that. But whatever you put there.
Uh-huh.
So, and the game has focused on action, and it's asking you, how would you get your first customer?
Well, that's actually part of the question. I know it's in my mind because I already do work with young people. Um, uh, Either parents bring them to me and I work with them, or I like to hire young people as interns in my office. I've had as many as 3 in the office at the same time, and I tell them this is not a part-time job. You are an intern to me, and I choose to, I choose to teach them during that time because I want young people when they leave my office to understand what it means to work professionally, and I think they get that based on the feedback that I get from them at the end because I always ask them, okay, what did you learn while you were here, and they will tell me. So
I
now
think I think you take a real mentoring role, which is a different focus than many people who are like, okay, here's some other hands to help me do my work. You were saying I need some work done, but I also am working on
correct.
the people who work with me.
That's right. And I almost never give them scut work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes there's some scut work that has to be done, but that's not what they come in for. They come in to do substantive work. And it's my challenge to prepare them for this substantive work that I give them so that what they do is useful. They're not just playing. And they discover that very quickly. And boy, do they step up to the plate. Works.
You know, the thing I want to point out, there's a lot you can learn about crafting questions and sharpening, but I want to point out that great questions are not actually about wordsmithing. It's not about being clever. It is about meeting the moment. If you can, and you know, that's why the end of the last show, you said to me, what's one piece of advice for listeners? And I said, learn how to be present, because that actually underpins all of this stuff. If I can be really present, then I can ask a question that is really salient for the moment, that actually can shift something categorically. So, you know, one story out of my own life, and I have a few, but when I was 16, my mother asked me, would you like to meet Rob? World's easiest question. Rob happened to be the son of her colleague who'd just come back from being an exchange student in Japan. You know, sometimes when I'm working with young people, I say, long, long, long ago, before the time of internet, before the time of email, and before anyone knew what sushi was. And they all look shocked. But, you know, this was long ago, before anybody where I grew up in Indiana knew what sushi was. So he'd just come back from Japan. He tells me about it. And then I remember him looking me up and down, and I'm about 6 feet tall, so I'm much taller than most people in Japan. And he said, well, you wouldn't be able to buy anything to wear there, but they would build you something. And for some reason, this particular conversation lit a fire in my heart. And it took me a year, but I became an exchange student, which fundamentally changed the course direction of my life and has impacted where I am and how I think about things even now. So that seems like a really incredibly simple question, but it absolutely met the moment and my need in my life. And I spent my senior year at high school in Germany as an exchange student. So that's the surface story. It took me 40 more years to realize that this question also indicated that my mother was willing to let me go.
Yeah.
And that was a really tender moment when I got the depth of what looked like the ultimately simple question, which has profoundly impacted my life. So that's why I say it doesn't need to be clever. It needs to meet the moment, because a good question is like a doorway into a new landscape. It is a new perspective. It should be something that's generative, that is compelling, that makes you go, wait, what? And the best questions, we like to say in the art of hosting, Phil, but I love this phraseology, are the questions that make you tremble. The one that makes your heart leap up and your stomach fall down at the same time, because it's, oh yeah, oh no. Because it's right at the edge of the comfort zone. You're excited by the prospect, and you're scared witless at the same time. That is actually a fantastic question.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The final power, are we ready to talk about that 5th power now?
Is hosting. And, you know, okay, people say, I've said I've been a facilitator almost 30 years, but I actually think of myself as a host. And that's because I'm part of the art of hosting field. So I've taken that word from there. But there is an important fundamental about moving from hero to host. the work that you do isn't actually about you. You are hopefully helping to host other people into their brilliance, especially if you're in caregiver roles. It's easy for caregivers to become the hero or to like try to center themselves in the story. But far better if I'm actually working on behalf of my clients to uplift them and help them. And hosting means that I'm looking for what methodologies, what practices help people stay in relationship with each other so that they can get the good work done, especially if it's going to be innovative and therefore there's going to be turbulence, or we're facing any of the major conflicts we have today. And there are multitudes of them where people feel divided and, I'm over here and you're over here. How can I host the field so people can find each other, can find understanding? And if I can be at all skillful in using some simple methods that actually help people to be in inquiry together and stay in inquiry for long enough to figure out what it is they actually really want to do and then bring that to conclusion. So, somebody said, well, why hosting? And I have a colleague who used to say, well, if people came over for a dinner party, are you facilitating them or are you hosting them? The very best host, and I know you're a good one, Madelyn, in the dinner party area, is actually looking for, how do I help my guests connect with each other, find stimulating conversation, enjoy the best of each other, learn something new while enjoying good food. That is an example of hosting from a home point of view, but you can also do that on every other level and scale. How do we host each other in this world to create a more generative world? I think that's a compelling question for right now.
I I'm sitting here saying to myself, I think she understands hosting a dinner party better than I do, even though I do it.
You do. I've seen
I
you do
do it naturally. But
Yeah.
you're right. That's what you're trying to do. Yes, you always want to serve good food, but you really want interesting people to have a chance to interact with each other. I've often said to people, you have to come because you're an interesting person, and I'm going to have other interesting people there.
Yeah, that's the real essence of it. There, of course, you can finesse that skill. All of the 5 powers are things you can learn a lot more about because each of them is an art form in itself. And there's this thing about mastery, getting good at something, that gives you the ability to move into artistry, using your own unique flavor, and that moves into mystery. Once somebody said to me, good facilitation is 40% the facilitator, 40% the participants, and 20% magic. And I personally am showing up for the magic. You can't force the magic to come, but you can create a container where it will arrive.
Yeah.
And so all of this, if I look at the 5 powers as my 5 fingers here, then this bit here where your wrist is, that actually is your own personal practice. And why this is an important part to me, I broke my little finger one time. And I had to be in a cast for 6 weeks. And when they took the cast off, my hand was like this. I was like, it doesn't work anymore. Somebody broke my hand. And there was just because there wasn't enough muscle power there after 6 weeks to hold my hand up. It didn't take long, right? But so that's just metaphorical for this bit of who I'm deciding to be is as important as any technique or tool or method I'm ever going to use. In fact, these days it might be more important because all of us are hungry for authenticity. We're hungry for a field of trust. We're hungry for being invited and valued and seen. So who I'm being is, for me at this point in time, after 30 years of practicing in groups, far more important than any technique. And I'm at the point where I'm tired of the next theory, because actually, how do we be good human beings together is the most paramount question that there is on the planet. What is a good human being, and how do we do that? Well, part of that is your practice. Can you practice something? I don't know. It could be yoga. It could be meditation. It could be swimming. It could be petting the dog. It could be getting 10 hours of sleep because that's what you need, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you can be present, then you have the flexibility to move in whatever direction is needed in the moment. But the moment you become too tired, disoriented, overwhelmed, you react, and that really is like standing in the corner of the room. There's nowhere you can go. So our work is to be able to be in the center of the room, to move where we can be most helpful, and support those people we care about and whose work we care about, to do the good work by also staying present and doing good work together in whatever way we can help that to happen. So my personal practice actually is really, really important these days more than ever. As I look at the overwhelm that's in the world, as I look at the anxiety, people are telling me they're waking up in the night with racing thoughts, and this I'm hearing from everywhere in the world. So all of us are in the perfect storm right at the moment. How can we counter that? It is by staying in personal practice so we can stay present, and it's in staying in practice together so we're not afraid. So, these are the things I think the 5 powers are about.
Wonderful words of wisdom. Now, with that almost a sense of conclusion, I want to jump back to hosting.
Yeah.
Because I thought about what makes a dinner party a real hosting event, I'm thinking about a business meeting. Now, I can see now that there were people who would call a meeting together, and they may not have done it consciously, but what they wanted was argument. They wanted to hear different perspectives, and they didn't even want it in a pleasant way. They literally wanted to have fierceful, arguments back and forth because they thought that was the best way for their group.
It's a robust conversation.
Exactly. And I remember that there was a young man who transferred from one division and into my division. And in our first meeting, he started speaking very loudly and forcefully. And that's just not how for me, what I wanted to hear was what people had to say, get comments. It was always modulated because I wanted people to be present. I didn't want them to feel like they were in a fight. I wanted them okay. And I remember distinctly calling him out after the meeting. After the meeting, I come to my office and I talked to him and I said, "Why are you so angry?" And he says, "Oh, I'm not angry." I said, "Well," and I described his behavior and he said, "Oh." And I gave him a book called Working Through Your Anger. I said, "Just go see if this is helpful to you." That's all I said. He comes back to me 2 weeks later and he says, "You know what? I don't need this book anymore. I'm really not angry. I know how to do this." And after that, he was like everybody else. He suddenly understood there was I hosted a different meeting. Mm-hmm. And he joined that meeting. Yeah. And he was wonderful. I mean, he really was a bright guy.
For me, a little story on this level. I once worked on a merger process for 5 months full-time between a telecom organization and a business they bought. And they were having to merge the entirety of the structure. And so they tried merging the senior leadership teams. And that didn't work very well until we actually got to the bottom of the focus on how they did teaming. So one of the groups felt like, as you described, we should have robust conversation. And, if the guy can still stand up at the end, it was a good conversation.
Right.
And the others were like, we are a team and we support each other as a team. So, like these two behaviors were the antithesis of each other. So the robust people thought the other ones were weak and vice versa like this. So it was very fascinating to look at, how you invite is how people show up, right? Mm-hmm. So as I look at how meetings are hosted, one thing is, can you get all voices in the room so people actually become present?
Yeah.
So a framing, hello, everybody, here's why we're here. Here's the agenda for today. I'd like to invite a check-in. You might call it like that, or just invite everybody's voice to start with. Mm-hmm. Because most of the time people come into a meeting, their body arrives, like even on Zoom, but the brain and everything else is trailing behind and doesn't show up for 10 minutes. And then they're like, wait, what? That's so in order to avoid, wait, what? Then one of the ways I can help people to be present is to actually invite them to check in. If their voice comes into the room, the rest of them tends to arrive. Mm-hmm. And I can get a quick litmus test. How's everybody going? Like, what am I facing here? Like, is that look on her face actually because she's pissed off with me? Or has something happened? Yeah. So I'm not making an assumption something has happened. I've got a story and I know what's going on. So I can help set all of that up in the way that I host things. And then I can look and say, maybe this isn't a conversation where everybody's voice around a circle is helpful. Maybe I want people to get into pairs and talk about something and come back, because more will happen when they get in a smaller group rather than in front of like, how do I use what I know to help people, to host people into better and wiser action? There's a lot of action going on. Not all of it's wise. Would be better if more of it was.
Yeah. Well, as you're talking, I realize kind of intuitively, one of the things I used to do when I prepared a meeting, yes, there was always an agenda, but there was always a question associated with each of the topics, so that when they came, they had a time to really think about what we were going to talk about, because there was a question that probed them. And you're right, when it was an invitation to come and share what they were thinking, and then as I hosted it, I was allowing and opening those spaces for them to share what they had thought about. Yeah.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is actually how almost all of the powers work together, right? Yeah. So can I set up a field of generosity by reflecting what I value about what's going on, or what I value about the work that's gone into where we are right at the moment? Can I focus on shaping the story to help us move forward together as a team, so that people are understanding the story that we want to be in together? Can I use the power of invitation so that they show up in a way that will be helpful for us getting the work done together? Can I use the power of questions to help people get a new perspective, or to have thought about what they're going to contribute on, so that everybody's making their own unique contribution? And can I host that well? And then finally, like the last one is, how do I prepare myself in such a way that I can really be present and I'm really acting as the host? I'm not so invested in my own idea or agenda that I can't hear what other people have to contribute. It's all of those working together.
Now, that's really nice to know. I hadn't put it all together like that. What I was concerned about was, I wanted to make sure that the people who tended to be quiet, who sometimes would, if not prompted, would not say a word, I wanted to give them time to think about the topic.
Yeah.
Because that's really what they were doing. Introverts are really thinking about things. Extroverts just think out loud. So
yes.
But obviously I was doing more than that. It's great to know.
Yeah, and just going back to a small hosting point, introverts have a lot to contribute. They just don't process in the same way. And if you don't make any space for them, the extroverts will take it, because there'll always be somebody who can't stand being in the silence. Silence is actually really generative, and we've created a culture that doesn't know how to deal with it. So, one thing to do is say, I'd just like to give everybody about 30 seconds to make some notes for themselves. Your first thoughts on this matter, so that we can all have prepared something and then move into our conversation. So I'm just going to set the timer for 30 seconds. Be back in a moment. And just, that's not the usual practice in the meeting, but it would be really helpful.
Yeah.
To get all the brains at the table.
Yeah. There's another, I guess now I'd call it a hosting trick. I don't know. You'll tell me which trick it is. I will often begin a speech, a workshop, a talk, a presentation, whatever. I will say to the audience, I would like you to take a piece of paper and would you please fold it vertically. On one side, put any questions that you have. And on the other side, I want you to list any word that I used that you wondered why I used it.
Mm.
And it is remarkably effective.
Yeah, that's a great hosting trick, isn't it? Because you're actually asking people to participate.
Oh yeah. I want them engaged. I mean, if I'm gonna spend, no, I shouldn't say it that way. If they are spending time listening to me, then I should give them the best that I can give and help them listen the best way they can listen. Yeah. That's the way.
And, in doing that, you're inviting their brain to take part in it. You're giving the brain a job, which the brain loves.
Loves to do. Oh, my goodness.
Loves it.
That's why questions are so important.
Like you might host your meeting by saying, hey, we have something that's really important. It's a matter that's quite serious. Would you three listen for this?
Ah,
Would you three listen for that? And would you three listen for this? And then we're going to pick those up after we've, had heard about the topic.
yeah,
So you're giving the brain a job.
yeah.
That's also really a
That
clever
too.
piece of hosting.
I like that also.
Mm.
I think I did something similar to that. I was speaking at the Smithsonian, and I said to this half of the audience, I want you to look at this room as if you were a thief. And I looked at the other, I said, now this half of the room, I want you to look at this room. Of course, we're in a big auditorium. Look at this auditorium as if you were the housekeeper who had to clean it. Well, what I was teaching was that who you think you are changes your perspective. Well, they got it. They got it in spades.
Yeah.
Because they saw such different things when they came back to talk about that. Yeah.
I have sometimes done that too to demonstrate perspective. I had a little card, and I'll give one. You're the housekeeper. You're the fire crew assuring fire safety.
Yeah, that's a nice
You're and the final one is the thief. And then I ask them, have a team meeting, and then you're going to report back to us as if we are your role, without ever mentioning what that role is, and the rest of us are going to guess what it is.
Oh, nice.
That's very fun too.
That's a nice one. Well, I can't believe it, but we've run out of practice. We've run out of time already. But I will give you just a moment. You've introduced 2 additional powers plus practice. So a few words for people so that they something they can do tomorrow, and maybe only one thing they can do tomorrow.
I think for this segment, I would be focusing on what's a question you can ask in the moment to really get some practice in asking questions, to move into I wonder rather than I know, because I wonder is a really generative state to be in. And then the other thing is to be in awareness about where do you feel well hosted. You can learn it, and you can learn from anybody in any moment. Is there somebody who makes you feel really welcome, who makes you feel appreciated, who's interested in what you're thinking? And all of the powers we've talked about, half of the work is gaining awareness of seeing where they are at work and how you can put them to work. And these are supposed to be small things that can help leadership and community come from anywhere and anybody. So this is the next book I want to write, and I'm looking forward to how that's going to unfold. And I ask for your energetic support. Whoever you are and who is ever listening, thank you so much for that.
Well, you certainly have my energetic support. You know that. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Mary Alice to give her your support, just get her at getsoaring.com.
That's right. Thank you.
All right. Mary Alice, once again, this has been so much fun, as well as very informative. Thank you
so much, Madelyn.
Every now and then, there is something that changes how I think about the world. Grounds for Thought is a place where I talk about these moments so that you can explore the meaning for yourself. As I listened to Mary Alice talk about the last 2 powers, questions and hosting, I was reminded of some of my other guests and the gems they offered us. As many of you know, I publish a weekly called Mental Espresso, 1 minute or less clips from my guests. Just like caffeine, they are designed to give you a little jolt of energy and inspiration. So let's begin with questions. The simple fact that a question sets our minds to thinking, so much so that you can tussle with a question for a long time. In fact, there are questions that have been consuming the minds of great philosophers for their whole lifetime. The guest who comes to mind on this one is Kelly Cressip, who came to Unlocked to talk about conversation. Here is what he said when asked, how can a conversation be made more vital.
So some of that has to do with planning in advance and thinking, okay, I'm going to have a dinner with this person. What can I find out about them that is the question that will unlock something in them that maybe they didn't see coming? A person going to college, you can think of cliche questions to ask. What's your major? When do you plan to graduate? But if you do a little bit of thinking, what's the question that might get them to think about something else? What's something that you're absolutely passionate about? What's something that really incited feelings for you recently? Sometimes you can do back channel work and find out by talking to somebody they know. It's like, what's the question they're waiting to be asked?
When I compared the kinds of questions he suggested we use, they seem to follow Mary Alice's recommendation about asking questions that are of the moment. All of us can recall a moment in a group conversation when someone adds something to the conversation that is simply not what the group is really talking about. After a moment of silence, someone resumes the conversation as if the other comment had never been made. No one usually says anything about it, but that other person tends to go silent. If you think about it, I'm sure you can recall such an occasion. About a year ago, this happened at my own home. I had invited several people to come, meet some really interesting others, have a meal, and have a great conversation. It was one of my guests, Kelly Cressip himself, who came to the rescue with a question of the moment that helped the other person move easily back into the conversation with no embarrassment. Kelly's question was of the moment, and it was generative, one of the other powers that Mary Alice talked about in the last session. Mary Alice's last of the 5 powers is hosting. Now, frankly, I didn't fully understand what hosting was until she talked about me hosting dinner parties, creating a place that provides good food along with support and encouragement for members to share at their best. It came together for me at that point. I have a goal. Bring together people I think would enjoy both meeting and talking with each other. It got me thinking about another of my guests from this show who does this virtually. Artem Mushin-Makadonsky runs a virtual conference each year on storytelling in organizations. I asked him to be a guest on my show because when I spoke at his conference, I enjoyed the best experience I ever have had speaking at a conference. Let me put this into perspective. There have been times when I was a keynote speaker in a virtual conference where I was unable to see what the audience was seeing on the screen, and I was not able to control the slide advancement. Can you imagine that? There have been times when the lighting was directed into my eyes with no recourse to change it. And there were times when I was selected but was given absolutely no reason why my topic related to the audience. Now, I thought it would, but I wanted to hear from the planners how they saw it so that I could better prepare. In all these cases, neither planners nor host was present during my presentation. Artem's conference was run in a way that clearly appreciated that I was giving of my time and expertise. Giving is the operative word. It felt as though my invitation to speak was directed at me, not just anyone. It felt easy to interact with both Artem and the system for conveying my materials and information. It felt comfortable when I was giving my talk, as I knew that Artem was online and even monitoring the chat constantly. When I invited him to be a guest on my show, he was surprised, but fortunately for all of us, he said yes. Here is what he said about who his audience is and how he serves them. I think you'll be surprised.
I do this conference, and what I care like 99% of the time is not the participants. I really don't care who comes to the audience, how long do they stay, or even what connection do they experience at times, as much as I care for the speakers, for how structured it is, for how easy it is to process. That's why I take the extra time to just map it out in terms of I take a calendar out and I just draw it out. When should I send an email with the request for this information? What email should I send a day before, an hour before? How do I thank the person? And I just get it all planned out. I don't do a percent of this work in terms of marketing. I do a lot of marketing in terms of talking about the conference and recommending, but that's just a fraction of the work I put in.
I hope you were as surprised as I was when he said that he didn't care about the participants. Now, of course, what he meant was that his primary audience was the group of speakers he assembled, because he knew that without good speakers, registrants would not return to another conference, and they might even just sign off of the current one. That's hosting. And his comments are a perfect little jolt that reminds you that you must think about who your real audience is. Now, when you think about the times you bring staff together, do you always consider the business goals as the only things worth attending to? I hope by now you know they may be the purpose of the meeting, but they are not the audience who will deliver on the purpose. Hosting your staff needs to be done, and now you have a set of powers to help you do so. Okay, I know. I can imagine that many of you are wondering how you're ever going to implement the 5 powers in your workplace. I tend to be an incrementalist. Do one thing until it becomes normal, then add the next. Over time, you can use all of them because you have brought them into your work as you were ready and to try them then. They become your practice. And then I remembered what another of my guests, Kameen Samuel, said about thinking you can't do it all. She says that we often tell ourselves that we can't be generous and make tough decisions. We can't take time to tell stories and be efficient. You get the point. I asked her why we see some things as exclusive of attaining something else. Let's hear her response.
People who have had a lot of failure in their life. And I like to look at it as failure currency. It is a way to realize that your failure matters. Like, you can help people if you've been through something, because you can help them either recover faster or not go where you went. And so there's a level of currency to that, a level of payment for that says you've been battle tested. And so this ability to say, what's an or? Well, you've already lived the or. Let's choose an and. What if I could be happy and have money? What if I could have love and money? What if I could have success and happiness or children and live wherever I choose to live? It's just our creativity that needs to be activated, and our curiosity about how could I do that?
One of my goals for producing Unlocked is to bring you guests who bring you value. My goal in producing Mental Espresso is to bring you some of that same value in very small packages that allow you to sip the value like a great cup of espresso. Mental Espresso is produced weekly and is sent out to those on my mailing list. I email each week a short piece that introduces the upcoming guest, along with a question for you to consider about the topic, and finally, a link to the week's espresso. Mental Espresso. So, if you aren't on my mailing list, go to my website's contact page and sign up. I never share my list with anyone, and I send out no more than 1 email a week. An email that usually takes no more than 2-3 minutes to read, along with a 1 minute or less mental espresso to watch and feel the gentle jolt from hearing a gem. Last but not least, the name of this segment of the show, Grounds for Thought, was indeed inspired by Mental Espresso and its faithful followers of more than 10 years. I want to thank you for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation and learned something new. If you have a question you'd like to explore with me, go to my website, madelynblair.com, MadelynBlair, and schedule a free consultation. If you aren't already on my mailing list, please stop by my website and register on the contact page. You'll get a mental espresso every week when you do. I'm Madelyn Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilient leader.